Folks, welcome inside the Blackwood Broadcasting Studios at an undisclosed Institute of Higher Learning. This is the Jake Feinberg Show, and we're happy you could all be part of the program today. Individualism is key in all art. To be individualistic, you must borrow from others, which means you have to get inside their world and become more secure because of the insecurity. You are humbled not by the money or name recognition, but because of the genuine article. The good Reverend Gary Davis, who sits somewhere high atop the Fur Peace Ranch, drinking whiskey, smoking a cigar, and mentoring my guest. How to handle yourself in live settings, even if you're playing in a bar in front of 5 people with a combined total of 3 teeth. How to carry yourself, how to be yourself, and to forever create. Expanding sound has always been one of my guest's priorities. He uses a finger-pick technique that creates a rosin-scented Oz of skin to string. The direct physical contact without any accoutrements. These acoustic performances blend folk with blues and the remnants of legal LSD, which was the crown of creation in the Bay Area. My guest was a member of Jefferson Airplane, which was a band that mushroomed out of the melting pot movements of the late 60s. They amplified sound out of speakers at the old Fillmore, all the while being immersed with peers who also had large sonic palates like Carlos Santana, Jerry Garcia, and Papa John Creach. My guest learned to sing his mind verse after verse after verse, and then extrapolate off of that with Jack Casady and one hot tuna seared medium rare with a side power trio that has the proficiency but also the love needed to make authentic music. More recently, my guest found his groove at Levon Helm's recording studio and performance venue where he recorded his CD River of Time as the weeping willows cast their shadows on the bank's green edge. Hot Tuna and Leon Russell will be at the Rialto Theater January 24th here in Tucson. Jorma Kaukonen, welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show.
Hey, Jake, how are you?
It's nice to talk to you, my friend. How are you?
I'm really good. Wow, that was powerful stuff. I need you to be my press agent.
Then let's get going here. I need it. No, I mean it's
really very nice, very nice.
Yeah, and it's important because Jorma, I'm not a musician, but a lot of my show is based on the idea of leadership. What is leadership, and how it can be communicated in nonverbal ways. I talk a lot, and we seem to all talk a lot in our society now. But it seems to me that your generation and you specifically grew under the tutelage of mentors who did not. They talked, they had a good time, but they expressed their leadership and their credibility in nonverbal ways. And I couldn't help but just start with a guy like the Reverend Gary Davis. But before we go there, let's talk a little bit about, everyone glosses over this cat. You always bring him up, but Ian Buchanan was the one.
Right, may he rest in peace, yeah.
R.I.P. So, I mean, let's talk about him, but also when I interviewed Bobby Weir, he said you also sat at the feet of the good Reverend. So if you could talk about Buchanan and then your experiences with the leadership qualities of Gary Davis, that would be great.
Sure. Well, Ian Buchanan, he's really one of these unsung heroes. He passed away way too young. And I was going to Antioch College, and I'd been playing guitar for 4 or 5 years, but I didn't know anything about finger picking. It's something I always wanted to do, but I'd never been around anybody. Now, Ian was one of the sort of Dave Van Ryck generation of folk musicians, and Ian was an incredibly accomplished guitar player. And he started teaching Reverend Gary Davis stuff, but the Reverend wasn't his muse. Lonnie Johnson was. Ian was really more of a jazz player, but he and the Reverend were buddies, and so he learned a lot of that stuff. And I just fell in love with it. The Lonnie Johnson stuff was way over my head at the time. But Ian, for a guy who, was so accomplished at that time, and he was one of these guys that, was really a pure artist. He really didn't care about commercial success.
Mm-hmm.
He played for the love of it. If he was playing a gig and people didn't listen, he would just get up and walk out because he honestly didn't care. He's a really interesting guy. But for some reason or other, he saw something in me, or maybe my playing was so obnoxious because we were living in the same house. There's a defense mechanism. But he really took me under his wing, and he spent a quarter at Antioch College opening the doors for me. Shortly thereafter, I got an Antioch co-op job in New York City. I was at the Rusk Institute for Physical Medicine and Rehabilitation, 400 East 34th Street. I don't know if it's still there. It was a spinal damage hospital back in the late 50s, early 60s. And a bunch of John Hammond had the job just before me, and a bunch of the guitar playing Antiochians had that gig. It was a great gig. But anyway, so I moved to New York, and I was there for, I don't know, 3 or 4 months, and I, in some respects, I still sit at the Reverend's feet. I'm not a Reverend specialist like some people are, like some of the great players like Ernie Hawkins, or Woody Mann, or Stephen Grossman. There's a bunch of people out there that understand his idiosyncratic way of playing better than I. But there was something about the Reverend that announced himself to me as my muse, and in some respects he still is. I don't spend the time filleting Reverend Gary Davis songs like I used to, but his. He was such a biophile, his love of life. I mean, here's a blind black guy, sight-impaired black guy, born in the late 1800s down in North Carolina. It was not, in many respects, it was not a fun life, I'm sure. And I didn't know the Reverend as well. Some of the other people did, but he's always seemed to me to be such a positive person, without even giving a nod to whatever his sundry, social and physical handicaps might have been.
Of course. What I love the most, the idea is like, did you think that, people say, I'd like to get a definitive thing here from you, it may be hard for you to answer this, but a lot of people say you were an innovator and a continued practitioner of this finger pick style. But did you actually, and that's what I'm saying was Davis doing that? Was he sort of the one that you kind of were looking at the first time? Just trying to get I'd like to hear it from you, because you
Well, in a way, I think Ian was more important to me from a stylistic point of view, because the Reverend only played with 2 fingers of his right hand, and Ian played with 3, and I played with 3. There's a lot of different ways to skin this cat. There's no such thing as right or wrong. But one of the things, like I tell my students when I'm teaching, is most of our successes and our progress in life are defined by our inadequacies rather than our strokes of genius,
Mm-hmm.
And when I was a kid and I was learning how to play this stuff, I couldn't do it the way the Reverend did, and I got a lot of static from the hardcore, blues and blues characters, and the Reverend didn't do it this way, but I just wanted to play the songs. I mean, today I would say, well, the Reverend might not have done it this way, but I do, and this worked out okay for me. I wouldn't have said that back then, but it really is true. I mean, the fact that I didn't have those insights into being able to clone some of the details, I developed, and I certainly didn't think about this at the time, but I wound up developing my own style.
And you just just perfectly. I mean, it's funny. I was interviewing David Garibaldi, the Tower of Power drummer, and he said that in his early career, when people would come up to him and say, "Hey, you sounded like this," he would want to slit his wrists, because it was like I totally get it. And now when I hear people saying, "Oh yeah, these guys sound like the Airplane or the Dead," I don't want to hear that. I ultimately want to hear the individualism, and I look at someone like you, an impressionable young cat in the East Coast, and here you have this opportunity to learn under a guy like Davis, who had a visual impairment. He was, and yet he was being himself. And I got to believe that that was one of the early people that said, "Hey, Jorma, just be yourself." But you tell me. I mean, that's the kind of stuff, because I just feel like youth in today's society, especially in music, and you probably see it at the first Fur Peace, it's like, what do you got to say? Be comfortable and say it.
Well, like I said, I wasn't as close to the Reverend as some people, but he was always important to me. And I'd met him through the end, and years later, up until the time he passed, whenever I would be where he was, and I would say it's Jorma, and he would remember me. And for a while I thought, I was talking to my friend Ernie Hawkins about this. I said maybe he was just being polite. He went, no. If he said he remembered you, he really did. I heard a story from somebody. I was doing that Pete Seeger's Clearwater Festival up in the Hudson River 2 years ago, and I was doing an interview with this Brit, and he had come over. He was a Reverend style player himself, really played well, and he had come over years ago, back around the time the first Hot Tuna record came out, and at this time, he was one of the guys who looked askance at guys like me that didn't do it the right way, but he knew the Reverend, and he'd been so he was at the Reverend's place, and he went down into the basement where the Reverend had a record player, and he saw that the Reverend had the first Hot Tuna record there, and he put it on, and the Reverend came downstairs, and he said, talking about my playing, that boy can improvise.
Wow. And
I'm not the most facile improviser in the world, but I rarely do things twice the same way. But when I heard that, once again, I wasn't there, so I can't swear that it's true. But I love the story because I heard that about the Reverend also. He could be, oh no, that's not the way to do it. You got to do it this way, because he was always messing with you. He loved to bust people's balls, but he also encouraged people to step out on their own also. So that was like an ultimate compliment for me, even though I didn't get it directly.
I think that's very well said. Is stepping out on your own, and how do you we live in a day of total interconnection now. Even though that your Fur Peace Ranch is just looks tantalizing when I look at it, and then I've had friends that have gone and the kind of guests that you bring in, and you're really bringing in those guys. I just like you to clarify this for the record. You bring in a lot of guys like you that didn't do it, quote unquote, the right way. What? Right. Tell me about the Peter Rowan way, the Gene Clark way, the Jack, right. The Jorma Kaukonen way. What is that way as opposed to the right way?
Well, I think it's focusing on your own. That so-called right way, in my opinion. We always have to learn from somebody. So you start someplace knowing nothing. And you need to focus on something to need to learn it. But at some point, whether it's an accident, or whether it's a confluence of your inadequacies, or whether it's a conscious decision, at some point, as an artist, I think you have to realize, I've gotten what I need, and now I need to do something with it. I have all these colors in my palette, or whatever metaphor you want to use. What am I going to do with them now? Maybe you use sounds in a way that evokes some aspects of, let's say, a guy like Reverend Gary Davis. I mean, my version of "I Am the Light of This World," for example, which I have been very fond of for a very long time, contains some of the Reverend's cool intricacies, but that's really not the way he does it. And it's great the way he does it, and it was great the way I did it.
We're talking here with Jorma Kaukonen, and on the East Coast, can you tell me? I've interviewed a lot of guys like, Cosby was doing stand-up before anybody knew who he was. Grisman was part of the jug band scene. Queskin was there. Van Ronk, I think. But I want to know where Kaukonen pre-heliport, pre-Marin County. What was Kaukonen doing? Were you in all those scenes, or paint the picture for me?
Well, I was in that scene, but I was a complete non-entity, and I can sum up. Like when I saw that Dylan movie, what's it called, No Way Out, or something like that.
Yeah, No Direction Home.
No Direction Home. I mean, I was there in that era, and those black and white pictures, I remember that, and all that kind of stuff. But here's the thing, and this, like I said, I was a complete non-entity kid who just come to New York, the big city from Ohio, and this will sum it up. I'm hanging out with Aeon one day, and he goes, "I'm going over to Van Ronk's tonight to play poker. Would you like to come?" "Of course I'd like to come," I said. And he says, "Well, you have to sit in the corner and don't say a word." I went fine, and that's what I did.
Because you were a non-entity at that point, right? Complete.
I mean, they could have cared less about. Ian was my buddy, but the other guys, I was just one of the kids,
Mm-hmm. But you're saying that you decided to bolt to the left coast while you were still a non-entity?
Yeah, yes, absolutely. I went to the West Coast to go to school. It seemed like the right way to stay out of the draft at the time, which I wasn't interested in participating in. Although I did get drafted as soon as I graduated from college, and I was married at the time too, but that's another story. But anyway, so I went out there to go to school, and the first week that I was there, I was going to school at Santa Clara, which is down the peninsula from 50 miles south of San Francisco. I'm walking around, and there's a poster, a bill, just a mimeograph poster on a telephone pole, and it said, Hootenanny, Folk Theater, First Avenue, San Jose. And so I went, and then that night I met Jerry Garcia, Janis Joplin, Ron McKernan, who we know as Pigpen today, and a bunch of the regulars, that became, name recognizable over the years. And that's just how the scene was, And so, and I played my music, and they liked it, and I got to play behind Janis a little bit and do my own thing. And it was a very sociable, likable scene where everybody was encouraged to be good. Kind of unlike the New York scene in a lot of ways, where the older guys really looked askance, at some of the younger guys coming up.
It's so great to talk to you. I mean, it's for me, this is all a fantasy because being born in '78, your career was so far underway at that point. But to hear even going to Van Ronks for poker, sit in the corner, know your place. I mean, there's a pecking order, and then
you bet.
And then this. So that really you got wrapped into the. Can you just tell me the year that you moved out there?
I moved out there in '62.
Okay, so this is pre-electric. I mean, this was really the
absolutely
unbelievable. So you were right in the West Coast folk scene of San Jose, and plus
absolutely, and because I was pretty good, I wound up getting gigs, and I was an affable guy, so I wound up hanging out with people, and it was really a lot of fun.
What do you remember? It's when I listen to your playing, and it's really interesting. I mean, I a lot of times I hear, I'm trying to figure out. I'm like, boy, I think Jerry was influenced by Jorma, and maybe vice versa to a degree. What I'm trying to say is how close were you guys, and how often did you talk? Were you just casual admirers of each other, or did you wind up getting together and play once in a while?
Well, we did play together periodically. I'm not sure that. I think that Jerry liked my playing. He was always very complimentary about it. But Jerry wasn't primarily a finger picker. Jerry's more a flat picker, coming out of the bluegrass jug band scene. And his sensibilities when he was playing guitar, banjo, his sensibilities as a member of a band would ultimately become very educational to those of us who never really played in bands before. But the thing was, like I said, the nice thing about the California scene back then is everybody really. They liked the scene. We were all there to play and be heard. It wasn't there wasn't a lot of swinging dick stuff.
But I know you. Yeah, so you just use the bluegrass analogy for some reason. The way you and I'm not a musician, but when I hear you play the acoustic guitar, the scales are very similar. Sometimes the sound of the guitar, Garcia's sound is very hard to come close to, and I'm like, boy, it sounds like. That sounds a little bit like Jorma's sound, and it's maybe it was just.
Well, perhaps. I mean, this is not something I'm really capable of commenting on, but I started out playing bluegrass, early. I was just learning to play the guitar, and so I'm not a bluegrass player. When I play bluegrass, I played like a 14-year-old kid I was when I first played, because I never really kept up with it. But I love the music, and so there's no question that some of those sounds, some of those scales, some of those intervals are deeply lodged in my. It might be.
The thing about Jorma Kaukonen is that there's no doubt in my mind that you were also, so you had the Hootenannies in San Jose, but San Jose also had this incredible soul cooking blues scene down there with the organ. I'm not sure. Were guys like Mel Brown or even guys like Clifford Coulter, the organ trios, were those things happening? Were you going to the black clubs in San Jose and in that area?
I wasn't aware of those in San Jose. I did go to black clubs in San Francisco, however. I remember I went to the Fillmore, where it was still a black club, and and I saw Bobby Blue Bland open for B.B. King.
Oh yeah.
And they the second story, they still had barbershops with the guys to touch their conchs up, that processed hair. And there's a guy named Johnny Talbot and the Thangs, Thangs, that opened for all of them. And I became friends with him, and I would come up from San Jose and go over to do weird things. I'd play harmonica with their band in a bar in Oakland, a black bar in Oakland. Or when the airplane got going, I actually remember taking my Rickenbacker 12-string over and playing with a blues band.
See, that's what I'm talking about. It was this beautiful melting pot of taking your sounds and going into other areas, and there was no vibe. You know, it was just come in and play. And if you can play, then let's have fun.
Exactly.
You know?
Yeah, totally.
And it's that kind of I don't know, nonconformity is really it's the wrong word to use. It's just there was nothing linear going on in the Bay Area, and I wanted you to talk about you know, you said something to talk about the unsung cats. The obviously Bill Graham gets a lot of headlines for being so diverse with his sets and who he put on there. But did you gravitate to the some of the writers and some of the like Ralph Gleason or people like that who truly took to this idea of saying we have the best of all music here in the Bay Area, and that's what was built up. That's where the producers that worked with the airplane too. I mean, talk about how it all kind of came together for you, especially when the airplane was first happening.
Well, I think a lot of it came together for us in spite of ourselves. Ralph Gleason, of course, put the imprimatur of real music on rock and roll and stuff like that. I mean, he was a music critic, a jazz commentator, etc. And when he would talk about the music we were playing in the same terms, he would talk about Coltrane or something like that. It was obviously very flattering. I was just there. I'm so interested in playing. That's all I really thought about. I mean, for sure, you met Bill. I mean, he was a larger-than-life figure. He managed us for a while. All these people, and because I grew up, one of the reasons I went to the West Coast is I really loved the beat scene. This is way before hippies, and so to meet Lawrence Ferlinghetti or a lot of those guys, Allen Ginsberg, they were still alive back then. I mean, that was exciting stuff for me because I'm from Washington D.C. originally, Southern Maryland. Basically from a hick kid from a southern town, because Washington is a southern town, to wind up in a place like San Francisco and actually meet all these people that were my literary heroes and musical heroes. It was really cool.
It was Ginsberg working at the Greyhound bus station at that time? I know when he wrote Hal, he was working at a bus station in Berkeley.
No. This was later. He was already the big dog.
The beat scene, how potent from a sort of a public consciousness point of view. I mean, people were really into it at that time. I mean, what was it about? Was it just the power of the words? Or was it when they were in front of a large group, they really just captivated Put me in that time for.
Well, I think it was a little bit of both. I mean, when you read Howl today, or any of those works from that period, they were shocking at the time. They're not shocking today.
Right.
To be able to mentally recreate, how breathtaking that stuff was, you need to put yourself into the drab world of the time, or something like that. I mean, you look about. I mean, what are they censored for today with the written material? And the answer is nothing.
Mm-hmm.
But back then they did, and so there was a lot of scatological stuff that was artfully used. It wasn't just like profanity for profanity's sake, It was artfully used to say we're looking at the world in a different way, and all that stuff. Without the beatniks, the hippie thing never would have happened. I think they were a huge setup for what was to come.
That's interesting. I had an opportunity way back when I was just a fledgling broadcaster to interview the venerable drummer Bill Goodwin, who wound up on your playing with. He was very good buddies with Spencer Dryden, and wound up playing on the Crown of Creation. Spencer, I'm really bummed. He's one of these. I'm obsessed with these guys, these drummers who were so versatile that they could go into situations and play, folk music or swing, and then they could also play airplane music. He's left us now, but I just couldn't think of a better person to ask than you. You've had some pretty amazing drummers with Hot Tuna.
Sure.
But talk about Spencer.
I think Spencer was one of the most versatile drummers that we had. That we played with a lot of good guys, but he's one of the most versatile guys. And there's no question that his sound, that his rhythm, the sound that he and Jack created as a rhythm section drove Surrealistic Pillow, after being at Baxter's Crown of Creation, all those earlier albums, if it were, the rhythm, as we know, the rhythm section is what any band is all about, and they were very powerful.
I completely agree.
And somewhat idiosyncratic.
Can you explain what that means from a music point of view?
Well, I mean, Spencer, when Spencer came to play with us, he was playing drums in a pit band in a burlesque house in L.A., But the thing is that, we laugh at it because it's funny, but the thing is he's playing from charts, he's playing written music. It has to be the way it is. I mean, he was a schooled musician, so he could really do anything. So he brought a lot to the table when he started playing with us, and all of a sudden the constraints of having to do it twice the same way were removed.
How do you feel? I mean, this goes back to Fur Peace a little bit, because it's sort of like the perfect hybrid of part of my show has been based on this idea of the imbalance today of experiential or street learning vis-a-vis academia. And what you're talking about with Dryden is the point of saying the guy could read music. He had a school, or maybe he went to music school.
Right.
But how do you work with younger students? Who everything's sort of, there's a curriculum for things now. You go to school, you learn inside the walls, but you were learning inside the walls of the Hootenannies and the Popeyes and the Soul Clubs.
Right.
And that's a big talk about how you work with younger kids today to get them to be more comfortable being themselves, in that they don't have the live opportunities to play in front of maybe people that they could learn from like you did.
Right. Well, I certainly try to. I mean, there are things you need to learn in order to play. But, and I sort of, and I guess that all of us that teach have our quote-unquote method, but to get wrapped up in a method is not a good thing, because there's a lot of ways to skin this cat. The guitar is a boundaryless instrument. So I think what I want to do with students is to, certainly I teach them songs from my repertoire, but to look at these things and say, look, I don't need to learn to play this the way Jorma does, but here's some interesting stuff. This is music. This transcends Jorma's personality. What am I going to do with this? I mean, it really is important, I think, to somehow be able to discover yourself.
And how? And what are the if you could pinpoint a couple of things that you take people of all ages, of all abilities at this. Is that correct at Fur Peace?
Yeah, sure.
And if you see somebody who's it's just about how do you get them to get closer to their individualistic side at the Fur Peace Ranch? Do you they have to get up? Talk about the if somebody comes there for a week, a younger cat, what can they be expecting?
Okay, well, there's the classes are Friday morning to Monday morning, the only 4 days, but it's really it's a total immersion kind of thing. And one of the things is that if I could focus on teaching a concept. My concept would be to whatever you're playing, whatever style you're playing, however many fingers you're using, is that you have a solid groove, because as I mentioned earlier, the rhythm section drives the band, or if you're a solo guitar player, it drives your playing. And so there's a couple things you need to learn. There's a lot of ways to approach this. I don't like elastic music that doesn't have a beat you can tap your foot to. A lot of people do. I'm not critical of it. I'm just saying that doesn't do it for me.
Mm-hmm.
So I would encourage people to be able to execute whatever they're doing with a time framework that makes people want to tap their feet. Other than that, do what you want to.
Right. And the Fur Peace Ranch, how often do people, how often do you offer kind of courses?
Well, we're open from March through November, and it's pretty much every other week. A weekend, rather.
What about for journalists?
Well, listen, we love journalists. Get in touch with Cash or my wife. I'll take you out to dinner.
I just would love. To me, when I saw,
you would love it.
Because you guys are to me the. Well, let's But before we go any farther, there's a piece of music I wanted to play for you, and then we'll come back and talk about it. Candyman, and we heard the violin there of Papa John Creach.
Yep, you can't miss it.
I was going to say it's sort of a twofold thing, but I don't want to, now that we're on it, how did you Papa John is one of those guys. I realized that you guys were on a similar label. At least this album that I'm looking at was on Grunt, and this is a compilation. Was it? And I'm like, but I look at Papa John and I'm like, that guy was playing with Blue Mitchell. He was playing jazz. Like, I mean, the guy was swinging it. And I'm just trying to figure out, how did you recruit him, or how did you wind up? How was he a logical fit for the Tuna?
Well, Marty and Joey Covington ran into him in a bar in L.A. I think it was called the Paris Club, and they brought him to San Francisco. We were playing the airplane was playing Winterland, and he sat in and never left. I mean, he was one of these guys that obviously was coming from a much different place, but to him it was all music, and if he liked it, he was ready to play it. Really an amazing man.
How did we get to, when did you start to see the beginnings of, because it seems like everyone that I've talked to from your brotherhood, essentially, even guys that were older than you, we go back to Reverend Gary Davis, or we go back to John Lee Hooker, we go back to Chuck Berry, Papa John Creach. It was all music. But then,
all music.
But then it started to get very barriers started to go up in music. Radio stations became all soul, all jazz, all rock. When did you first start to? Were you even aware of it? That the fact that music was becoming very stratified, or?
Oh, sure. And that's one of the things, in some respects, that from a marketing point of view, that harmed Hot Tuna, because it was very difficult to categorize our music in that time. I mean, now they have Americana and all kinds of other subcategories that we sort of fit into. But, when they started to create these categories for music, in some respects, I think it was very stifling.
Well, that I agree, and I actually think that I mean, and I'm one to kind of get excited sometimes about labels, but at the same time, I feel like it hurts the ability for true creativity, the opportunity to take I mean, look at the instrumentation. That's my question, though. First off, with Grace Slick, you guys had two very big hits,
right?
And I saw an interview with you where you talked about, this is very fascinating. You said, I think we listened to our producer too much, but it was good because you got some hits. And talk about when you and Jack knew, because I mean, there's Starship albums, you can find them all over the place in Tucson. Goodwill, you're picking them up and you listen,
sure.
and it's okay, but it's not.
They have the big hits.
Well, they did, but my question for you is this: it's about timing and it's about being cagey, and I'm trying to figure out why you guys knew at that time that you wanted to play music you could tap your foot to, as opposed to continuing down this trajectory of fusion music. How you knew it was time to.
Well, I don't think I personally didn't play well enough to be able to be involved in fusion music, but I mean, I think this is certainly not intellectually architected by me, although it might have been by other people. Marty and Paul. It was really important to them that our music be dance music. God bless them, I mean, that was their statement. I really didn't, it really didn't matter to me. I don't dance. You don't want to see me dance, But I love playing music, So I don't think there was like an intellectual assent about the two hits that we got, which are the reason we're in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, or any other great songs we recorded. That's just who we were. And
if you can look back to then to now, as you'll be coming to Tucson, you're going on a huge tour in the new year. Who are you and Jack Casady? For all those legions of fans like my daughters or future generations, you can give the producers credit for putting you in a position to succeed, but ultimately it's about the quality of the character. So of course. Who are you guys?
Well, that's a good question. I think we're two old friends that listen to each other, both inside and outside the art. And one thing that I think that whether you are enamored by our music or not, that we're not bullshitting you. We are, we're telling the truth as best we know
it. When you are you very conscious of? Do you have any decision making as it relates to? The venues you guys play at? I mean, I've seen people write, I saw Jorma at this really small venue in Maine,
Right.
But that part is part of.
I could if there was something that popped up that I didn't like. But we've got a great agent. He's a great agent. I trust him completely. And I look at it this way: a gig's a gig. Some are better than others, but I really, unless it's just something that turns out to be an unbelievable dump, it's really a drag. I just let him do his work.
Humor me and talk about some of these joints that you guys would roll through when they were open, like the Capitol Theater in Passaic, which was was a smut house by day, and then at night John Scher would open it up, and you guys would be picking for 2 or 3 hours. I mean, that to me is you said the word elasticity before, but that to me was the elasticity of the live music scene. And I think that it's imperative that that you paint pictures of that kind of stuff, because it's almost non-existent. I mean, they shut these things down 11:30 now. No questions asked.
Well, it's right. These things, nothing even vaguely like that exists anymore. I mean, once again, it's just the way it was in that time. They hadn't really figured out that we were doing something that might be construed by some as being dangerous, and we needed to be curtailed in some way. I mean, we'd play till 4 a.m. sometimes.
Yeah, right. No, and then I think Mothers Against Drunk Driving might have had something to do with that, because the kids weren't getting home at 5.
It could have been. I mean, one of the things, and this is probably not the venue for this, but I was talking to one of my buddies he's a Vietnam vet, and he's my age, and we're talking about stuff, and there's a lot of stuff that those of us that came of age in the 60s brought to the table that I think have continued to grow and to green and to be positive. Some of the attitudes towards drugs and getting high proved to be counterproductive for many as things unfolded, And like I think I might have been saying earlier, there was a time where we probably thought we invented all that stuff, but hey, guess what? Sex and drugs have been around for a long time, but a lot of that stuff, there's a lot of people that aren't with us. A lot of careers were harmed because people weren't sensitive enough to really do it, et cetera, et cetera. So it's not a value judgment. I'm just saying just the way it was. We threw some pebbles in our own pathway, but we got through it.
No, and follow up on that, because you talked about the values, the greening of America now. What are some of the things that you guys have pulled into this time period? Because for me, sometimes I'm just so in the woods, I can't get out of it. And tell me, but what are some of those legacy things? I mean, yeah, I agree with you. The period of time that I'm focused on was a very druggy time, and a lot of people did have major drug problems. But I tend to look at it and say, okay, people did what they had to do. Like Chuck Rainey, the great bass player, he's like some of the best cats I ever played with. They were the biggest users ever. Right. But so throw that out and tell me about some of the stuff that you look at and say, boy, that has seen it. It's still going.
Oh no, of course it is. There's nothing new under the sun. I think, and it is what it is. And this is not a dissertation on addiction and recovery, because I've been sober for a number of years, and that's what worked for me. I know a lot of people that can party, and that works for them. So it's easy to sort of like cast a net over everybody. But I think if you're talking about the music, then you can't get sidetracked with whether the musician or the artist you're talking about is living a dysfunctional life. It's not your business. If you like the music, you like the music.
One final question for you, Jorma, and I really would like you to talk about it as much as you think you can, is that I read a quote somewhere where, people like myself, we use social media today to try to get stuff out on Twitter and Facebook and all that stuff. And I read this quote you said about the Hot Tuna and the Grateful Dead sort of being the earliest bands that fostered social networking. And I'm like, you know what? I tried to explain it to somebody and it didn't come out right. So could you please, because you're right, but explain that, because that to me, it was just the idea of trading tapes. Tell the audience what that means. I love it.
Well, I think it wasn't just the tapes. It was everybody was part of the part. There was like family members. Everybody was part of the culture, and the tapes were a huge part of it, of course. But and that gave people a reason to contact each other. But as a result, to see the show in Salt Lake City at the Salt Palace, no. But I saw the one in Denver at the Globe.
Right.
People really cared about that stuff in a very profound kind of way. Now, one of the things I think that is interesting in that time, up into the pretty much into the mid-'70s, is the relevance that the music and the art and the writing had to the culture of the time. You know, it's way beyond Vietnam. It was just like everything was tied to everything. You know, you wanted to get a record, you wanted to hear what Crosby was saying about whatever he was saying about. You wanted to hear what the Airplane had written about this or that. I don't see. There's some great music out there today. I got a 7.5-year-old daughter and a 16-year-old son, and the good news is they listen to music that I can listen to. It's listenable, you know, and from a father point of view, that's a great thing. But I don't see the significance. They are not inextricably intertwined with day-to-day life like the music and the art was back then.
Could you talk a little bit more? To me, I can't speak about it. I wasn't around, but like, is it just the idea that you could not go on YouTube and hear David Crosby talking about the Vietnam War, so that there was a waiting period and there was this anticipation, and then you go to?
I guess from a nuts and bolts point of view, that is true. But it's more than that, because, you know, we can still go onto YouTube and see all this stuff, and people don't care in the same passionate way anymore. You know, it's like, okay, another county heard from, you know, I love David. He's an opinionated guy. He's a very bright guy. He says a lot of really cool stuff, you know, but it doesn't have the weight. It just doesn't have the weight that he used to have. Now, you know, back in that time, I was more interested in the music than in vocalizing, you know, politics or anything like that. That wasn't my thing, but I was certainly aware of it. I mean, you couldn't not be aware of it. I mean, it's one of the magical things of the time that the music and the culture, everything was inextricably intertwined, you know. You couldn't read a paper without thinking of a song.
Seems like you're kind of hinting at education right now. I mean, you're hinting at the idea that people were, if everything was interconnected, it means that everybody was aware of other things. Everybody's aware of it, which means that there's a disconnect now where people are off and they're not that worldly. And I'm not saying that everybody was, but there also comes to the idea of like, so you went to get a degree, you went to get an education, but there was also, it seemed to me that there were a lot of cats that were just well-read, well-schooled, and they were being mentored. So there were other ways to become educated. And
absolutely. I mean, I went to college, and I like to say going to college didn't hurt my education any at all. Yeah, there are. And I think a lot of the people of that time, and probably today also, but I can't really comment on that, everybody was really seeking, was looking for something, you know, and many of the people that were luminaries on the scene at the time were college graduates or going to college or art students. I mean, it really was an intellectual movement for a while.
One final thing.
Hard to think about Nicki Minaj as being intellectual.
One final thing is in this past year, as we wrap up this calendar year, you talked about everything had a weight to it. There was substance. There was a heaviness to it. Can you give me an example of something that in the 21st century, in this time, that was heavy, that you experienced? It could have been in the car listening to your daughter with some hip young vocalist. I don't know, but what was the heaviest thing that happened to Jorma in 2013?
I think two things. This year is the first time. My son's been playing guitar for over 10 years. When he was with me for the latter part of his, he lives with his mom in Virginia. When he was with us in Ohio for the latter part of his summer vacation, he goes, "Dad, I want you to teach me "Been So Long," a song that I wrote." And I went, "Well, I'd love to." And I taught it to him. He learned it by heart, and we played it on stage together several times. I can't even begin to tell you what an honor and a treat that was. And I told him I'd played with many people that people would consider to be important, but this is the most important thing for me. And the other thing was that my daughter, who's a classical pianist, had a recital last weekend, and I got to hear her play in a 9-foot Steinway Grand of the Ohio University School of Music. I think that tops my year. Those two things.
Yeah, sounds pretty good, and we're looking forward to seeing you and Hot Tuna and the venerable Leon Russell at the Rialto Theater, January 24th. And Jorma, I really appreciate you taking the time. And
well, thanks a lot. We'll poke your head by and say hey.
I absolutely will, my friend. Take it easy. Happy New Year.
Back at you, man.
All right, take care. Yep. This is the Jake Feinberg Show. We'll see you all in a little bit.